of the area. Palestinians are still evacuating, with a UN agency saying 80,000 people have fled so far. And for more on the situation, we can speak to former diplomat and president of the Middle East Policy Council, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley. Ambassador, really good to have you again on BBC News. I first just want to ask you, what do you make of what we've heard from many Republicans here in the U.S. who say President Biden, with his remarks, is abandoning Israel and helping Hamas?
Unfortunately, I believe those are politically motivated statements because the president has been very clear that he is standing with Israel with regard to its defensive capabilities, so continuing to provide whatever is needed for Iron Dome to prevent attacks from outside. But we're talking about Gaza, and that's very different, the bombs that are used in Gaza against civilians.
What about what Israel says, which is in order to defend itself, it has to go in offensively into Rafah to defeat these remaining Hamas battalions that the Israeli forces say they've identified there?
The president has been very clear. They have to have a plan that allows for the safety and security of civilians. America has been very supportive of Israel being able to defend itself, but there have been those who have said from the beginning that this overwhelming attack, these extraordinary number of civilian casualties, actually works against Israeli security. That is reality.
We've heard some very disappointed voices from Israel, of course. How big of a rupture do you think this is right now between Israel and the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, I know it is a shock for Israelis to really have their leadership be called up on the carpet, as it were. We've been clear. The president's been clear, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, members of Congress. This has not been a sudden change. The warnings have been put out. The position of the American leadership and people have been very clear to get us to this point. But it certainly can be reversed with a change of policy and action from the Israeli government.
Let's talk about Rafah, because if you listen to the briefings from the State Department, the White House today, they seem to indicate that their assessment of a possible ground operation in Rafah would be catastrophic. Benjamin Netanyahu says they will fight with their fingernails if needed. Where do you think this is headed?
It's hard to say how much of what the Prime Minister is saying because he actually intends to do it full force or to placate his coalition that is to the right. He has been balancing for 17 years. He has made American presidents uncomfortable for 17 years, resisting, pushing back, disagreeing, disrespecting from time to time, as we saw during the Obama administration. But then he's got to weigh what those costs are. And the American support, diplomatic cover, staunch friendship that has been with Israel from its beginning is something that he cannot afford to lose, nor do I believe Israeli citizens want him to lose that. So he's got calculations to make.
Okay, difficult position for him, you're saying. What do you think this all means for efforts to secure a ceasefire? From what we're seeing, negotiators appear to indicate that the process continues to be stalled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It certainly has exacerbated the problems. We also have to keep in mind what are Hamas's calculations. Some argued that the reason Netanyahu went into Rafah was to add additional pressure on Hamas. I think, unfortunately, Hamas has proved repeatedly over these months that the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza is not something that's going to persuade them to change what they're doing. We also have to keep in mind the hostages, and the Israeli attack is also putting them in danger.
That certainly is the case. We'll have to see how the situation develops in the coming days. Ambassador, always good to have you on BBC News. Thank you so much for joining us today.